When I first was on the assembly as well, we had regular updates from the police department and from the fire department, a variety of statistics. And I think today I want to both get an update from both of them and also have a discussion about whether it should be monthly or quarterly or biannually, trying to figure out the right time frame where we are getting the information we need, but we're not putting too much of a burden on the police department. So with that, is there a, Chief, do you have a PowerPoint?
We do. We just have a few slides
Okay.
with some stuff in Captain Sean Case, who's the patrol commander, patrol division commander, will probably be going over those.
Okay.
And we're totally open to suggestion. If there are things that are useful and people are interested, we can either expound on those today or in the future provide different detail. Or if there's things that nobody cares about at all, they can be stricken off. So we're flexible based on what members are interested in.
Well, one thing I will say is, so the fire department has provided us a little bit of a printout. I know that you guys used to do that. I really enjoyed those. I like having some numbers in front of me. So if you're able to, the next time we do this, again, whether it's monthly or quarterly, if you're able to have some statistical printout, I would really appreciate it.
We'll make sure that the presentation we have today gets to the clerk so it can be distributed, and then we'll just bring hard copies in the future.
Okay, great. With that, note for the record, been joined by Mr. Constant.
I think the case is in the corner.
Captain Case, would you go ahead? Oh, I see. You got to set it up still. Okay.
It should be quick.
In the meantime, no, we just did introductions. So I guess for my colleagues, I want to pose that question to you. In terms of statistical updates, I guess John and Chris, you're the only two who were on the assembly when we used to get them. What time frame do you think would be useful for those?
I think quarterly is too seldom. And a challenge that I have, is we talk to a lot of people, and they all know what the problem is and how to fix it. And it's hard to, if we go too far apart, I don't really have the knowledge. Okay, so I can I read in the paper that car thefts are down. Okay, that's great. But there's more to it than that. How's your rolling out the community council base stuff working, things like that. But we get those questions, I know the answer. And I'd like to be able to discuss it a little bit better. So quarterly is not enough. Monthly might be too much, but what do you do? I don't.
Well, I guess every other month then.
Every other month,
so
something
6
like
times
that.
a year.
But you're always available by email.
Right.
I think this is a helpful discussion. We see it all together.
Yeah.
So I haven't. I think in the last year or something, it seems like it's been more scarce.
Yeah.
And I feel like I got nothing in those conversations.
I think, we could accommodate either one, really. It just, and I think whenever we talk about statistics, you'll hear me sort of launch off into my usual preamble, which is, if you look at them, of course, really frequently, you don't see the change, typically, because the change is usually slow. It's not always true. Sometimes you have month-to-month changes that are pretty significant. And then the other thing is, depending on how we ask the question and then present the numbers, obviously all those things can change. So we just want to be mindful that we're cognizant of the questions that you're trying to answer, and then we're presenting information that's relevant. And so to the extent that we can change it pretty regularly, we're looking at a lot of this internally on at least a monthly basis, so it's not a super heavy lift to provide some information to the assembly, just with some of those caveats.
I think I'm going to request, as the chair, and I'll ask the co-chair, that you do it every other month.
Okay.
So I guess our next one would be in July, and if you have something fairly detailed prepared by then, I think I'd appreciate that. And June, we have a few other issues that have been kicked to this assembly that we can work on. I share your, how do I say it? So my graduate school was very, it was a policy school that was very statistically based, all about statistics. And what you learn when you do that kind of research and you read those kind of reports is it's very useful, but it can also be quite deceiving, right? People draw conclusions from statistics that they shouldn't be drawing. They constantly conflate correlation and causation, that kind of thing. And so I have, since actually entering public policy, the public policy sphere, I have actually become more skeptical of statistics. But I would like to see them, and if you could provide us with some detail every other month, I think that would be quite useful for us.
Mr. Chair, if I might suggest then, take a look at what we have today, and we can kind of adjust fire from there for whatever looks good. And I share your skepticism. My undergraduate degree is in economics, and so very statistically minded.
Okay, great. So with that, Captain Casey, you ready to go?
Ready to go.
All right, please.
So the last time for this particular body that we did almost this identical presentation, just with updated numbers here, was 2017. So the nice thing about that is that we have a long period where the numbers can change a little bit. So in almost every case, the slides are identical, same information, same measurement.
Yeah.
So we'll try to be as least deceitful as possible again with these numbers. It's the same thing except for the measurement.
Great. I'll note for the record we've been driving Mr. Rivera. Thanks.
All right, so this is kind of a fun little thing to get an overview of just what volume of calls we're taking in and rest and kind of our response time. So our first quarter last year, 2018, and first quarter of 2019 is what we're looking at right now. We have an increased call volume of 4.1%, which isn't terribly high. And the majority of our increased calls for service come with disturbances and trespasses are a little bit on the rise. What we do in Patrol Division is every week we get the calls for service in the city per community council district for the previous week. So we're analyzing this data on a week-to-week basis. And the areas that we have the highest call volume from the previous week, and we generally pick about 5 locations a week. We have our area officers respond to those locations repeatedly throughout the week, make contact with their businesses, management, in some cases their residences, and we make contact with the people that own the residence. We also arm the officers with the calls for service that happened the previous week, so they know exactly why we were there, how often we were there, and specifically what we were there for. And the idea here is we prefer not to get to the AMC 880. We prefer to kind of try to tackle some of these issues with the folks long before the case. Yes, sir.
You might hit, what's the AMC 880? We got a couple of new people here.
So we have a municipal statute. It's different for private residents with businesses, but you reach a certain call total, and our CAP unit, they look at all the calls for service throughout the year. They go through not only the police reports, but the comments that are put in the computer-aided dispatch system as well, and they determine whether or not they meet the code requirements, and if they have a certain number of nuisance calls throughout the year, then they end up getting charged for those nuisance calls. So the goal here is we just get rid of the nuisance call, we try to work together to figure these problems out before we have to kind of tackle this at the end of the year.
Sean, if I could add a little context to that, especially for like residences, we're not talking about like the police came to your house 5 or 6 times. We're talking about we came to your house like 100 times. Yeah. And same thing with businesses. The thresholds are different, but it's not, you have a business and you have legitimate need for police contact. You have a problem location, and we're there 5 and 6 times every night. And when that happens, the fines can end up being really substantial, on the order of $50,000, $60,000. But also businesses have an opportunity to work with the police department to mitigate whatever the issue is, and then the fine goes away. So just a little bit more detail on how that works.
And just to give you
I just want to add something. Mr. Thompson and I have been working on that very issue, and the first 100 calls are free. So it's after 100 calls we start charging. So substantial number of calls.
If I might also just add, Mr. Chair, that maybe a year and a half ago, you heard Mr. Trainee proposed an ordinance that would remove the nonprofit exemption, and it was a really hot conversation. And just for the members of the body, I intend to bring some form of that back, but with probably a different outcome and goal. And that relates to what I'm in discussions with Chief McCoy about, and that is that there might be some other entities that are not nonprofit but provide a public place that are hit with a number of calls that are local impacts, that they just have an open door, so they tend to be the place where the problem concentrates. And because and again, I'm going to be digging with the CAT team. They did convince me last night that some of the calls for a certain location were probably warranted for this conversation for them to be having. But like a grocery store has an interesting place in our community because they are the open door at 2 in the morning. That's where the people run into when they need help, and that's when a call comes. Anyhow, so that's a conversation that will bring back a kind of a scabbed over sore spot.
Please continue, Captain Case.
Thanks, sir. So just to give you an idea how granular we get, sometime a couple weeks ago, we had a local residence that had 3 calls in a week time period, which is a tremendous amount. went from a drunk problem to a disturbance to eventually an arrest. And so the following week, we had officers make contact with that particular residence because you can see with the progression of those 3 calls, the drunk person that started the issue at the beginning ended up being arrested at the end of the week. The idea here is that we have contact with the folks in that residence as a way of like, let's work this out so that we don't end up arresting one of your loved ones. We try to figure this out kind of a lot sooner in the process. So we're really trying to get down to the very basic issues that are kind of problems in the community. In terms of arrests, they're basically the same, less than 1% between the 2 first quarters of 18 and 19. The 911 wait time, that although statistically that's probably not the most significant thing in the world, I do want to note a couple things on this. First quarter of 2018, we had 4 more dispatchers and call takers that were working on the floor. So probably what contributes to some of this decrease. Currently, right now, we have 6 dispatchers / call takers in training. We've created 3 new positions for dispatchers over the last year, and currently we're also in the hiring process for 5 vacancies. So the dispatch process, from the time we post to hire someone to the time that they're actually cut loose and working on the floor, you're looking at like a 2-year complete cycle. And so the length of time to really fill those positions is pretty significant. There are 2 things that happen in dispatch. You have the call takers. Most call takers are also dispatchers, and they're kind of 2 different training tracks that they go on.
Thank you. For the record, we've been joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson. Ms. Kennedy?
Just on that number, that 15 seconds, is that an average then? Is that what you're looking at? Or is that typical type rate call?
The average, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Well.
So, and that'd be useful to hear what's like a maximum you hit, what's the quickest, for future data.
For
the mid-
911 answer times?
Yeah, and then what's your goal? Is your goal 3 seconds average, 5, 10, or is 15 your goal?
So I would kind of add in, I guess I would start with what we kind of talked about at the beginning about statistics. So if you ever call 911, we generally are answering almost instantly. But if you have a big event that generates lots and lots of calls, some of those calls can take much, much longer because we're on the phone with the initial callers. And so that's where you kind of stretch that average out. Do you remember what the NEA standard is, Eric? I want to say it's like 5 seconds or something.
Yeah.
Between 5 and 10 seconds. It's the goal is pretty close to immediate. We're a little outside of that, primarily just due to staffing. We're having to backfill a lot of staff positions with overtime and dispatch right now. But this hiring process the training process that we have going, plus the hiring process, we hope will, 1, bring those numbers down, and 2, really reduce the amount of overtime that we're spending in dispatch. Obviously, trying to run the 911 center at overtime is tremendously expensive and not something we want to do.
Because the public perception is it's 911. That means now.
Instant, right? Yep.
And it's so 15 seconds is like I got put on hold.
Right.
And their heads are exploding.
Right, I agree.
So.
Please continue, please.
What's that?
Slide.
Our last one over on the edge, there is 4.42 minutes to arrive on priority 1 calls, which are our person crime type of calls. In 2017, when we did this presentation, it was 5.5 minutes. So that's kind of a nice correlation of we've increased our actual officers on the street significantly in the last couple of years, and it's resulted in the reduction of wait time. There's some miscellaneous calls that aren't in here, but in terms of our ones that we generally want to know about, that's just kind of a breakdown between first quarter 2018 and first quarter 2019 in terms of our calls for services related to violent crimes, property crimes, weapons, drug and alcohol type things, and then public disorder types of crimes.
Can I stop you for saying? So, this looks encouraging. Everything is down, right? But this is just 1 quarter compared to 1 quarter. So this goes back to the question we were talking about before. I don't know if your next slide has it, but this to me, it doesn't teach us a lot, right? This slide, and on a short notice, I know you guys put this together. It looks encouraging, but again, I need a little bit more in terms of trend from multiple quarters before I can tell that this might just be a blip, right?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
But yeah, go ahead, Mr. Constable.
The other question that always comes to mind is, are we just getting to the new norm where people aren't calling? And, because that's a conversation I'm still hearing.
I think I can speculate that the answer to that is no, because if you look at the call for service data, it's actually up. So we have
Great.
more calls for service quarter to quarter, but actually fewer of the reported crimes. So thank you.
So I apologize, Kevin, in case I interrupted you. Do you have an explanation for this slide?
I don't, because, on the previous couple slides, you see that our calls for service are up just a little bit. And what we've taken out, of course, are some of those calls that are a lot lower priority. These are typically our higher priority calls, or the calls that the public is generally pretty interested in, depending upon where you're at in the city. So the idea behind this slide and these 5 particular sections are, this is what the public is probably the most interested in. So, but overall, our calls for service are up.
So I guess that sort of begs the question then. So what category is way up then? If this isn't arrest, right? This is just calls for service.
Calls for service. Disturbances and trespass are 2 areas that are increased. So we've changed our beat boundaries, and we did that January of this year.
First,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Quinn Davidson.
could you just repeat those 2 things? Trespass and what was the fifth one?
Disturbances.
Disturbances.
Yeah, so-
Okay, thank you.
And disturbance is like one of our broadest categories of just something's going on and the police showed up. It could be a lot of different things.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Gates?
Yes, I'm curious. There's a category of crimes because it's a category where I guess now you can see it's decided that there was really a crime or report or I guess resolved by call, no crime or report. Do you have a category like that? Or do you put every single phone call into one of these categories?
Well, it's many more above these 5 categories, but yes, every call gets classified as something at the dispatch end, and then depending on what happens at the conclusion of the call, it can also be reclassified as something else more specific once the officers get on scene and deal with the call, write a police report, or make an arrest.
Okay. All right, thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so January of 2019, we changed our beat boundaries. We lined those up with community council districts. As you can see, some of our larger areas, we combined community council districts, and then some of our community council districts, like Taku Campbell Lake there, that have a higher call volume, that is a standalone area for the officers. And then we've assigned 2 officers per shift to cover all 7 days for each one of the beats, which would be the big numbers here, 40s, 20s, 11 till 13. And what we started doing last week is officers started attending community council meetings. So for those of you who have calls from your community council districts, you can let them know we're coming. It's going to take a little while. The reason why it's going to take a little while is we can only probably do 5-ish, 6-ish a month because it's the same shift that has to go to all of them, which is the shift that starts at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, goes until 1 o'clock in the morning. But the officers are being armed with that data I talked about earlier, the last week calls for service, so they're giving the community councils exactly what's been happening in the last week, and then of course they can give them anecdotal stuff since they work that area every single day. You're going to field some questions, and then if we see a general trend that maybe we could pass on some information to the members about maybe some crime prevention or things that could be beneficial to them, we'll also put that out in those community council meetings as well.
Thank you. Ms. Zolota.
Thank you. We get a lot of concerns about various homeless camps or kind of traffic, and I've been encouraging folks to make sure that those are reported into the GIS system for the municipality. Is that information going out to those folks kind of in charge of the community council areas?
But we can certainly put that as part of their kind of thing they're putting out.
Because I think that would be a great way to show that you're definitely aware of what's happening in the neighborhood.
I think that was one of the things we had a couple years ago now where we did some presentations. One of them was probably even for the assembly on how to get in there and geomap it and along
And that's
with our-
something that data goes directly to the community policing team, because they're the ones that are primarily working with all the other agencies involved to mitigate the camps. But it's certainly information that we could share with the beat officers, and they have access to it as well on a regular basis.
Thank you, Ms. Lotto. Ms. Kennedy?
Actually, on Chugaki River, we're pretty excited about the idea of having officers come to our community council meetings on a regular basis. And my understanding is, though, they haven't been assigned out there yet, but you're saying they just started this week?
No, we started assigning officers in January of this year. Every one of the beats has 2 officers per shift, so there'll be 6 officers total in patrol division that are assigned to each beat, which would be the big numbers here on the board.
Okay,
I'll tell you what, if you fire me off an email when the next community council meeting is, I'll have one of the officers show up.
there's one tonight at Eagle River Valley.
A little short notice, but I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Because, yeah, people really are interested in that, and they think that's a great idea. So, anyway, yes, we'll talk.
The welcome has been fantastic. I mean, but you know, it takes a little while to get the officers in the mold of that. I mean, and they are coming off the street, so they're like getting on the calls for service. They're coming into the community council meeting. They're doing their 5, 10, 15-minute thing, taking some questions, and then they're out handling calls for service again. So it's a little bit different from those UNT community council meeting where a CAP member came, and you know that's kind of their deal. They're a little bit slower because they got the time to do it and answer a lot more questions. You'll notice that these officers that come in will kind of be like, all right, here's the questions, here's what I got. Love you guys, gotta go. You know, it'll be that type of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Constance and Ms.
So just back on the previous topic of the notifications, camp postings, and all of that, this isn't really an APD thing. I think it's an 8th floor thing. The system doesn't seem to be working. Recently, I have a number of neighbors who've made postings a month ago and still have not even received that generic email that doesn't tell them anything other than your notice has been received, let alone any follow-up. And so I'm not sure if there's anyone here from the 8th floor, but it's certainly a concern that I've been hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Constance. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, do I understand this correctly that there are a couple of officers in each area that's shown on that map during each shift, but they obviously have different sizes. So there are other officers who can cover, you know, for instance, like 45. I don't know. Is there the same amount of people in 45 as 25? Probably not.
So typically how it ends up, it's a good question. It's a great question, actually. So what ends up happening is because of our call volume, generally we'll have like one officer in this area, one officer in this area, and they end up kind of teaming up throughout the night and going to calls together if it's 2-officer call. Whereas like talking Campbell Lake here, which is one community council district, clearly geographically it's a lot smaller, but we'll usually assign 2 officers in that one beat, particularly like on a swing shift, because our calls for service during that time frame are so high that it requires more officers in that area. What I can tell you is that every shift, the 2 officers that we have assigned to these specific beats covers the full 7 days. So at any given time, what you can expect, depending on like injury, sick, vacation time, is that one of those 2 beat officers will be working in each one of these areas every day, 24 hours a day.
And it's a little confusing because the sort of the permanent assignment to the beat is sort of administrative in nature, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the way the shift is actually staffed every day. So we're staffing to make sure that we can handle the calls for service all across the entire municipality. But we also, sort of, in addition to that, want to make sure that the beat officers work their same area all the time. So it's a little weird, but the beat officer assignment and the actual staffing are kind of 2 separate things.
So would it be fair, Mr. Chair, if you mind,
Yeah.
would it be fair to say that there are assigned officers to each beat, but that other officers help them when the beat arises?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect way to put it. Much
Thank
better
you.
than I did.
All right, please continue, Captain Case.
Some arrest numbers for us, and what we have in the top one is just the month-to-month arrest. We went back long-term 2017, so we could kind of see that more in-depth trend and the cumulative numbers between 17, 18, and first quarter of 19 here down at the bottom. You can see we had a little bit more busy month in March, which kind of caused our numbers to kind of even out throughout the years. But overall, between 17, 18, and 19, we're up just almost 4% in our arrests.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about driving under the influence, alcohol-related collisions, and enforcement here over the next couple of slides. If you look at the last 3 years, we can see that we've had alcohol and/or drug-related fatalities. We had 8 there in 17. We had 9 in 18, and so far this year we've got 7. So our numbers appear to be increasing just a little bit than where we would like them. So where we're at this year in 2019, we put a little extra kind of effort on that driving under the influence or operating under the influence crime. And through the first quarter, we got 400. So if we balance that out, we're looking at 1,600 throughout the year, which means we're gonna far surpass by over 150 arrests if this trend continues through the first quarter. So hopefully we'll see a correlation here, at the end of the year that our fatalities hopefully start to go down a little bit with that increased enforcement. That's just a breakdown month by month, the first 3 months here of 2019. IDEU, for those of you who don't know, that is our impaired driving enforcement unit. They are partially funded by grants, and so their whole job is to go out there and arrest these folks, and they comprise of 40% of all of APD's operating under the influence arrests. But they're also out there doing other things. So over 1,500 citations that were speed related in 2018, over 1,100 proof of insurance citations that they wrote in 2018. Over 681 there misdemeanor arrests for driving under the influence and 45 felony arrests. So that's a pretty impressive total. Then you look down how many contacts that unit made. We're well over 11,500.
That's eight officers, is that right?
Eight officers and a supervisor, correct?
Mr. Weddle?
So, like the no proof of insurance I would think would be rarely alone. I mean, it's like you get them for speeding, then you check that.
Correct. That's a
They're
secondary
over that.
offense after you stop them for something else.
My guess is some large number of those, so they have it, they just have it with them, or?
So right now it's a correctable offense. It's
Right.
a relatively hefty. I can't remember if it's 300 or 500 fine, and then 500. And then if they have proof, they show proof of insurance later, like they just didn't have it with them, then that goes away. But we know historically throughout Anchorage, dating back to when it was a crime to have no proof of insurance, that we're pretty heavily non-insured in this town.
You believe that's the case now?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's no reason to change the data. We can't look at it like we did before because it's not a criminal offense anymore. But in most of the time, if the individual contests a citation and they did not have insurance at the time, but they go to their trial with the insurance, the magistrates will almost always dismiss the citation because they've since been insured. So it's very difficult to tell kind of what the real numbers are now.
Sorry, thank you.
Stolen vehicles. So stolen vehicles is one of those things that we have a little long-term data, and we've made significant attempts to try to reduce our numbers. So if you look at that 426 stolen vehicles the first quarter of 2019, if you go back to 2017 when we last did this, and these numbers, this 426 continues throughout 2019, that'll be a decrease in 1,200 stolen vehicles in 2019 versus 2017. So that's a pretty impressive number. And for those of you who don't know, the response really is a coordinated effort between our detective division, our patrol division, and then our partnership with the district attorney's office as well as the U.S. attorney's office. Put a significant focus on stolen vehicles. Our detectives come out and interview around the clock over an 11-month period. So last time I pulled the data, we had over 530 interviews in that 11-month period. That was just for stolen vehicles alone. We had over 1,200 offenses that we charged people for in that 11-month period. So the amount of effort and work that went into that is pretty significant.
Thank you. Mr. Weldon and Mr. Constant.
So, and what's bringing it down? I mean, there's repeat car thieves and now they're locked up, or now people know they're going to get caught?
So I will take a best guess, right? Because we won't take 100% of the credit. But here's some of the things that are happening. So every car that we stop that's occupied, where the vehicle's stolen, is occupied. So whether it's the driver or the passengers, they all get interviewed by detectives. What's happening is now we're down to just arresting the driver of that vehicle for being in a stolen vehicle. We're arresting the driver of that vehicle. We're gaining information. And even if we don't make an arrest that night, we connect that driver to other things like burglaries, thefts, other type of crimes as well as they're not just getting booked for that vehicle theft. Potentially we have federal crimes, which our partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office has proved to be very successful. We've had several different instances where there's been a group of people stealing vehicles, and we've ended up making an arrest of multiple people after a length of time of investigation. So when you take out 4 or 5 folks that get arrested on federal charges or pretty significant state charges that have been stealing vehicles for months and months and many a day, that's what's causing these numbers to go down.
And I would just, for a little sort of context, and this is something, again, we talked about at the beginning when it comes to numbers, this is a snapshot of just this first quarter, but if you've been watching over the last couple of years when we've talked about this, the numbers were increasing, right? Started in kind of 2014, 2015, carried on in up until January of 2018, so January of last year, we had about 400 stolen cars just in that 1 month alone. And we've been fairly steadily decreasing since then. And it was really sort of late 2017 when we really put a lot of these things in place that Captain Case just talked about. And so we are hopeful that we're seeing the result of that work. But again, it's something that we're always looking at, and we're always sort of monitoring the trend. Because just looking at 1 month at a time it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. But the trend generally for about the last year has been less.
Mr. Hudson.
Yep. So Mr. Dunbar and I just kind of had a similar thought, I think, and but I'm going to frame it slightly differently than what I just heard suggested to me. And that my question is, I understand that the federal courts came online, which gave us a new tool of enforcement, but for a while it seemed like the state courts, there were some problems with actual prosecutions going on. Are we seeing better flow through that system? And what's kind of your perspective on that?
So, Captain Case mentioned that we did some different things internally at APD, and we really emphasized getting detectives involved very early in the process. What he didn't mention is part of that effort also included getting the DA's office involved early on, and what we found was just having detectives involved actually made better cases. It made it easier for the DAs to prosecute those, and we had a much, much higher rate of prosecution really throughout 2018. And I think that's making a difference as well. So we're literally throwing like pretty much every tool we can think of at it. And I'm actually glad you asked, because we need to give the DA's office some credit for really putting a lot of effort into prosecuting those cases, and then also collaborating with the U.S. Attorney's Office when it was appropriate to hand the cases back and forth. So I think we have been seeing a higher sort of percentage or higher rate of prosecution on the stolen vehicle cases, and I'm encouraged that's going to continue. We have a relatively new to the position District Attorney Mr. Novak, not at all new to the Department of Law, and so we've been engaged in that discussion with him, making sure that we continue that pressure. That gets important.
Hopefully the progress under Mr. Novak continues. Progress was made under Mr. Allen. Please continue, Mr. Case.
Thanks, sir. So and the chief mentioned this, but we go back to June of in green here, June of 2018, we're at 247. From that month on, we've seen a decrease in stolen vehicles every single month, with the exception of February and March here this year, where it went up just a little bit. So we've seen this for about 6 months now.
Sorry, can you say that month again? What was the month?
June of 2018, we were at 247, and we went down to 232, 213, 200. So we've been down every month for about 6 straight months. So looks like we're definitely headed in the right direction. We're happy with that, but we're not letting up on our response and moving on to something better.
January of 18 was essentially the peak.
Yeah, I mean, you look 390. I mean, we're just slightly over that in the first quarter of this year. In 1 month, we hit 390, so that's things to be optimistic about. And this graph just represents the 2 lines, the top dark blue lines, the total stolen vehicles, and then the recovered vehicles, the lighter blue line underneath. So very, very consistent, very high rate of recovery. The last slide that I'm going to go over, and I'll try not to spend too much time on this, but I get a little bit excited about this particular slide. So we have Title 47, for those of you who don't know, it's long and exhaustive, but there's 2 primary things the police department deal with, and that's Title 47 as it relates to mental health, and Title 47 as it relates to alcohol. This slide is mental health. And so in the month of March, patrol officers transported 173 people to the hospital that were mental health related. And if you look all the way down here at the bottom, this number 40 right here, of those 40 of those folks really needed that setting for the mental health type of call that we were called for, which means we are transporting a lot of people to the hospital, and that is not the best setting for them. Currently, we have a social worker on staff that is out on the street about 4 hours a day, about 4 days a week. And she's dealing with that 173 that we come in contact, because the idea is if we had 6 of that person, we could run that operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we could deal with those individuals in the setting that's most appropriate with them. Now, that's not the one stop, that doesn't solve all the problems, but about half of that 173 can be dealt with in that particular capacity. The remaining hours of their day are spent doing follow-up from the previous contacts. So we are reaching out and trying to find resources for them, whether it's drug and alcohol treatment, whether it's mental health related. We're continuously contacting them to make sure they're touching base with the folks that we're getting in contact with. So far, at this point, we haven't had any issue getting people in treatment, drug addiction type treatment, and we haven't had any issue with getting them services for mental health related issues. That one takes a little bit more time, but we have it.
Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you, Captain Case. Over the last maybe year to year and a half, the state was in a crisis situation themselves in relationship to the state psychiatric hospital. And I had heard some tales that all of the local hospitals that have the requirement to accept these people for screening, triage, and everything have on a number of days been on the status of refer, and right up to the state psychiatric hospital, which was not accepting patients. And I heard that APD was playing a critical link in providing a humane option for the individuals who were unable to be seen in the place where they should have been. Can you update us on the status of the kind of usage of the hospitals as a means of taking people in for these Title 47 assessments, if you will?
So remember, with 2 of our 3 hospitals, they don't have a wing or a dedicated area that is for psychiatric treatment. So you're getting an emergency room staff that's making a psychological assessment. So you just assume that that's probably not the best assessment because that's not what their job skill and skill set is. The emergency room setting, without question, is not the appropriate place for a lot of these folks. Our officers, as you can imagine, we give them an option. Actually, we don't give them an option. It's the hospital, right? There's just not much out there. We're a social worker on staff. That's where we get to kind of start playing in the game of, hey, let's try to find out the best place to take these folks. But we have one. And so just to give you an idea, a patrol forwarded over 800 reports to our one social worker in the month of March alone, and we're sitting right around the 800 mark consistently. We did that as well in April. So 800 police reports where the officer had contact with some sort of mental health issue that got forwarded to that social work. Now, like, providing the appropriate level of care is just, it's not possible under the current setup that we have. Municipal, state, private hospitals, the whole thing. I don't know if that answered your question appropriately, but
I guess I would just put it more specifically. What I've heard is when the state's failing to do their job and the hospitals are full, our officers are driving around for hours at a time with some of these individuals. And my question really is that receding? Are we seeing some leadership out of Juneau? Or are officers still being the baseline level of care for hours at a time, which I allow them for, and I think that it's not their job, and I think we need to find a way to fix this.
So I think what you're referring to is we have instances where we have a court order to place someone in a hospital that is saying they're full for mental health treatment. By state code, where those folks go is they go to a criminal detention facility. if they can't go into, in this case, an API. And I can tell you that our officers have an extremely difficult time swallowing that, up to including driving around with these folks in their car for multiple hours, waiting for a bed to come open just so that they don't have to book them into jail. And that doesn't happen every day. But when it does, you can imagine the officers are not particularly pleased with having someone that clearly doesn't belong in a criminal detention facility. So we hear about it. So yeah, it happens occasionally.
I would say to your officers, if I had their ear, thank you. And I'm sorry we put them in that position, and I'm working to figure out solutions.
That's not.
Ms. Watson.
Sorry, we'll get there. Thank you. When it says Title 47 to hospital, what does that mean?
That means-
Because sometimes there's court orders for Title 47 holds. So, is it just, explain that to me, how you're using the term.
So I'll give you the gamut, and I'll give you the ones that we see most frequent all the way up to the most serious.
Well, actually, let me refine my question.
Okay.
So Title 47, I understand how it operates, but we're not talking, sometimes it's orders under Title 47 that you're receiving that you have to go and pick someone up.
That is not this.
That is not this.
Nope.
This is just people who fall within that gamut of needing care or response because they could be a danger to themselves or others,
Yep.
for either substance abuse and or mental health.
Yep, these are
Okay.
mental health related transports that came from calls for service from patrol.
So this
that
is
are
where
not
mental
court
health
ordered.
touches your work.
Yep, this is
Okay.
exactly.
Thank
That's
you,
the
I
perfect way to
appreciate
put it.
that. I have a lot more questions, but I unfortunately have to run. But thank you, I will follow up.
Thank you. And so we're about halfway through our time, and we're still on our first item. So, yeah.
That's it.
Oh, good. Perfect. Any other questions here? We have the APD a little bit later in the agenda too to talk about the building and the headquarters move. Mr. Welton.
So just briefly, it sounded like you said that if it's drug and alcohol help, that there are places available, but the mental illness alone is a real challenge. Is that correct?
It takes a little more time. Not that there aren't resources available, but that navigating that system takes just a little bit more work. Now, when I say that our drug and alcohol beds, I'll just call them beds, I'll mix up treatment with detox all together for this conversation. Remember, we have one social worker that's dealing. So, if we had 6 or 8 or 10 of these folks, it may be a different story. We may not be able to get people in. And they're doing one-to-one calls. So we come in contact with somebody that needs some sort of drug and alcohol treatment. That social worker does the assessment, has contact with that individual, goes and tries to find what's open and available for that particular individual, goes back, makes contact with the individual, and then shepherds them through that process.
But if you had 5 social workers doing that, you'd be sending too many people to the too few beds.
I will say that it would be a pleasant experience and a pleasant exercise if we had 6. I'll bump you up to 6, 2 per shift, if we're counting numbers, to see if we would overwhelm the system. I think we should try it and see.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Captain Case. Very good. So I think we're hoping to get another presentation like this in July, and we can work on sort of refining it a little bit. If my colleagues, if you have a specific statistic that you want to see, just for example, like homicides, not that you necessarily need to, but something like that, let me know, and I'll pass it along to the chief, and it can help refine that report. Thank you, Chief. So now, next up, we have the fire department for their update, and we have a handout here. Do you guys have a PowerPoint as well, or handout?
No, sir, just a handout.
That's fine. So if you want to come forward and identify yourself for the record.
Good morning. So I'm Eric Schoeneman. I'm Assistant Chief of the Anchorage Fire Department. Chief Hetrick has a conflict today with a promotional exam, and Deputy Chief Keene is out traveling. So Chief Hetrick requested I come and just present some stats. And we're kind of in the same situation with APD. Just let us know what you want, and we can definitely pull it. Monthly, twice a month, I think is perfectly fine. I believe, so what I passed out was kind of 2 handouts. One is one you've probably seen before, I think Chief Hetrick brings. And that's just kind of a rundown of statistics on a monthly basis. And the second one I'll talk more in depth about with our core team. But I would also like to start just to follow up on Captain Case with behavioral health emergencies in the hospitals. So this goes back within this community about 2 years, where we have the one psychiatric emergency department at Providence. The other two hospitals, Glen Hospitals A&C, as well as Alaska Regional, just do not have the staffing capabilities to provide that level of care. And so what's happened with Peppers or Providence Emergency Psychiatric Room is when they get overwhelmed, like with APD, AFD, they're forced to take behavioral health emergencies to other facilities. So literally the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been seeing what we call diversion for psychiatric and behavioral health emergencies. And once Providence goes on the closure to psychiatric patients, we then at this point fill up A&C and Alaska Regional Hospital EDs with behavioral health patients. On the annual basis, we do about 1,000 to 1,100 strictly behavioral health transports. And these are pretty much the critical type of patients at APD. There's, a significant enough psychiatric issue, and they may have cut themselves or overdosed. So APD will refer those to us, but ones that don't have a medical or traumatic injury, APD then handles. So between the two of us, that's a tremendous number of patients we're seeing each year. When you get into the EDs, especially, like an example is Alaska Regional, a psychiatric patient is taking up a bed, and it's very common that the patients will be in the EDs for multiple days. So the downstream effect of this is behavioral health, psychiatric emergencies start filling up the EDs, leaving less room for medical and traumatically injured patients. And it cascades into all the hospitals going on closure to all patients. And that means, from the fire department standpoint, we have to rotate patient transports between each hospital. So that doesn't happen every day where all hospitals are on closure. It's top of my head, probably 2, 3, 4 times a month. But it is pretty common to have any one of the 3 hospitals on what we call an ED recovery period, where we're just not transporting them, we're transporting to other hospitals.
Mr. Wellington?
Maybe it's time for you to combine that. So how many beds do we need for mentally ill?
So 2 years ago, I did testify in the certificate of need meetings, both. I don't think I did Anchorage, I did Massachusetts. So at that point, that was Alaska Regional Hospital and Massachusetts Regional requesting additional beds for substance use disorder and behavioral health. And I think Alaska Regional is about 24. That's on hold right now, kind of pending the outcome of the state and API and what's happening there. So other than API and psychiatric emergency room in Providence and maybe North Star, there isn't the capacity with Anchorage. They have what we call volume, that's APD and fire departments.
So 100 beds would work?
What do you think, John?
I mean, just order, or are we talking 500 or 20?
No, not 500. I think there's also a concept of a stabilization center, which is
right.
Because the hospital is the empty rate, right? And in between a stabilization center, where you're talking your length of stay there is going to be anywhere from a couple hours to a couple days, and then out the door because they need less significant treatment options to them. If we added those plus some emergency beds, your emergency room beds are going to be less, and your stabilization center is going to be. I can't remember what we looked at. Beds, we looked at something like that, but it was
it 20?
Yeah, I was going to say 20 to 40-ish beds for like a stabilization type center.
So if API were fully functioning, they have the room to do that, don't they? Don't they have 100 beds, or what's their?
It's 75 beds, but a number of them are reserved for correctional ongoing needs, and it really functions at around 20 to 25 beds that are available. And when they cut API in half from 150 to 75, they just didn't invest in the community like they said they would. And so, if I might, Mr. Chair, just add that there was an effort, as he mentioned, as Mr. Shinneman mentioned, that there was an effort this last year to increase the beds by both, I think it was regional and by Matsu Health, and there were massive increases, substantive, and would have been meaningful, but because of the kind of changes in Juneau, they pulled back their efforts. They downsized them, downscaled their projects because the uncertainty made it so they couldn't make the investment. And so if you look to those proposals, I think you'll get to close to what we need. And we've
Sorry
seen-
about uncertainty Medicaid cuts.
it was Medicaid and state, I mean, just a number of things that factored into their decisions to stop with their expansion projects. So if you look at regional and look at Metro Health's proposals and look at where they were aiming, that's probably where we need to be, but they've downsized their proposals substantially.
Could a stabilization center be something that this municipality has a direct role in, or is it something we need one of these other partners to do?
And we could have a direct role, and I think also kind of what's in it. Yeah, health department's involved, fire department will be involved, police department will be involved. What's kind of important is the 1115 Medicaid waiver. Most of the services that we provide in the stabilization center, and almost all of the services that we provide by the social worker out in the field, with either the police department or the fire department, would be covered in the 11, or could be covered in the 1115 waiver. So we're talking about services to mental health patients that doesn't 100% fund itself, but funds itself significantly. I mean,
But you have the upfront setup costs. Is
Yeah,
that something that
that's-
you just, off the top of my head, hypothetically, funded on alcohol tax?
You have to ask the administration, probably.
All right.
Well, but the operative function that he's mentioning there is the waiver, the 1115 waiver regulations. And so that's the place where everything is in hold right now. And the division is working closely to publish the regs, but they just haven't pulled the trigger yet. But they have told everyone by July 1st, the waiver is gonna be in place. And so, fingers crossed that we get there, because then we can start to find capital support from our partners and begin to do this work.
Thank you. You continue.
So just in on that one, it's not just PD, it's also FD that's, we're faced with kind of crisis both with substance use and behavioral health, and kind of the downstream effect it has with AFD just on our patient, our EMS system as a whole, with the overwhelming issues in the hospital. So I'll come back to that when I talk about the core team report a little bit, but just on monthly statistics, I will point out on the year to date, so we have seen a somewhat small decrease in our EMS responses and transports. And part of what Captain Case had talked about with, well, actually going back to the MIT team, APD CAP team, as well as with social worker. Well, we had a AFD firefighter paramedic embedded in that team, and they were primarily focused on Brother Francis Bean Staff A campus and interventions down there. We've continued that with our core team. So we've seen a steady decrease since 2017 in our total responses to the campus. It's been holding pretty steady. I'll definitely share the statistics on those. I'll give that to Chief Patrick next time.
Great.
But I think that has been one of the primary drivers on our decrease in our EMS responses has been just a decrease in total call volume to the campus.
I would like to see those numbers, because I keep hearing reports that that's the case, but I've never seen it after the third month of 2018 when we started down there.
Yep.
And one question, I now have seen 3 labels in Captain Case, in your proposal, it was mobile response team, seeing AFD core team, and then we talk about mobile intervention team. Are these discrete groups of people?
So the core team, so what the core team is right now, it is one employee on a temporary duty assignment, so we are backfilling him with overtime in this position. And his name's Mike Riley. He has a little bit of experience with community paramedicine from a previous employer. So last year we had actually, when his role with the MIT ended in the beginning of 2018, he did a community needs assessment for the fire department. And one of our big issues beyond substance abuse and behavioral health was just what we call high utilizers. And these are the patients that we would transport to the hospital 50, 100 times a year. And so one guy, what he does is basically works to try to navigate these individuals into social services, other healthcare programs to reduce the amount of times AFD, APD has to respond on them, and as well as the transports to the ED. So it's providing a better level of care, reducing costs is kind of the overall aspect. And I'd be more than happy to come for him to come in here and do a presentation on it.
But the answer to your question is he is not part of the MRT or the MIT. He's his own thing.
I think.
No, they do some coordination with this, he does coordinate with the CIT and Tanya, the social worker, but they're not, he isn't embedded with it.
Similar concepts, different groups with some overlap.
Yeah. That's
Team of one.
And CIT is a different thing altogether. It's the crisis
Totally
intervention team. And the 100 or 50 frequent users you're referring to, are these generally the same individuals around the homeless campus and in the homeless work, or are we talking there are some other individuals who call a lot that aren't actually part of that cycle?
It is throughout the community. On the core team report, this is what I provide monthly to the executive staff at AFD and also present to the mayor's EMS advisory board and public health agencies as well. You'll see reference there. He's kind of actually spent the time to figure. We don't track homelessness in our patient care reporting, but he's taking the extra step. Again, working with CAP team and also Catholic Social Services to determine their housing status. And the majority, it's over 50% actually have housing, and the rest are within the homeless population. So it's not just homeless. I mean, we see this throughout the community for a variety of reasons. And it's pretty significant because we've actually sent him out to examine some other teams in the lower 48 that are on the fire and EMS. And what we have here in Anchorage is definitely unique. It's no one else seems to see the types of quantity of high utilizers we do within the community. But being that he's a one-man team with providing with admin oversight, the effect he has is kind of limited. We're like APD, we could use at least 2 more mics.
Okay, please continue to your presentation.
So back to the statistics, was there any specific questions on that particular spreadsheet?
Which spreadsheet are you referring to?
This was the single one, not the core team, it was the other document.
This here, the standalone,
Yes, sir.
shows that things are slightly down year to date in 2019, although it's very small difference, so it could just be spin noise.
Yeah, like you said with EMS, I think it is just our core team, Mike Riley's efforts.
So it does look like EMS is down, but fire is up, and that kind of tracks with what I think people anecdotally are feeling. We had a number of major fire incidents just in the last 6 months. Can you speak to those at all? We seem to have a sort of rash of fires there for a month or two.
Yeah, the fire marshal will probably be the best one to talk to those specifically because a number of them are still under investigation.
Okay.
In terms of, I will dive into a little bit in the homeless campfires. I haven't looked at those numbers for this year, but they've been up to probably doing 2 or 3 a day.
2 or 3 homeless campfires a day.
Yeah, just here in the last week or so. And how that compares to previous years, it may be the same. But when you look at our fire incidents being up, I think it's predominantly again due to some of these large, the more visible fires we've had in January.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm trying to think of the news reports there. This could be for the APD as well. Was it determined that some of those fires were connected to each other, or they all appear to be separate incidents? The fires that were arsons.
I'm trying to remember the restaurant fires. That was, I don't recall.
I'm not sure that we've released a lot of information on that publicly because I think they are still under investigation, so I'm not sure how much of that we talked about.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Mr. Weddle?
You know, for both of you, so you're using social workers effectively, but you need more. And is that, my concept has been, okay, you have a budget, figure it out. You have a budget, figure it out what you need. But that's, I mean, you're looking for, but that's different. You want social workers as a different budget. Where's that come from? Who pays and?
Well, I think that the way that it has worked so far is that those have been components of our existing budgets. And so I think that it would be something that we'd be looking to expand. I mean, the alternative would be we decide to add social workers and we remove some police officer positions or some other functionality in the police department. And I'm not sure how much tolerance there would be for something like that. So I think when we talk about adding more to one agency or the other, that's the concept that we have in mind.
So it would be, okay, so 600,000 more in your budget and you'll hire something like that, but you're looking for a budget increase to.
I just think it's a discussion point at this point. This is something that we're finding to be effective and useful, and I think that it helps sort of reduce one particular problem so the remaining resources can focus on something else instead of spending time on that.
Yeah, I'm not challenging.
No, I know.
The question, I just wanted to know
I'm
where's the
trying to lay
money
it
come
out.
from?
Yeah.
Are we taking it from Natasha's budget? Tell her to provide you with six
I mean,
social workers.
Could. Oh, yeah, if she's not here, then we're good with that.
She's texting while meeting. I don't know if that's legal.
Our particular social worker technically belongs to the fire department.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
Right.
yeah.
So it's,
Well, that's my favorite.
Yes.
yes,
Ours
no,
too.
It's a partnership.
they're residing within our budget, but they're actually funded through the health department, and we needed the city needed a spot to put them, so they're putting others, but we do not fund them at all.
And if you want to talk about budget ads, I have a whole laundry list of things that I just bring up.
Great, thank you. So, well, as with APD, hope to refine this report and get some more data. And July, I think, will be the shooting for the next time we do this report. If my colleagues have any specific questions they want to ask of the fire department, statistics they want to see, please let me know, and I'll get in touch with Chief Hetrick. And yeah, this is great. Thank you very much for coming.
Mr. Chair, I did, in the past, and this would be for both reports, it was very helpful to see the breakdown by district. You know, and that has been provided in the past, just so people can see where it's cool, warm, and hot.
Sure. Great. And like I said, I think I'll talk to the clerk's office and see if we can get the A4 next time. I think it's a little more comfortable in terms of PowerPoint presentations. So with that, we still have half an hour left. We have two pretty meaty topics. We'll start with Chief Dahl, APD, talking about moving into new buildings. And also, I wanted to ask for prospects for purchasing the building. My understanding was, although it was very difficult to understand, that the proposition we passed this past year would perhaps facilitate that, and it did indeed pass. So I don't know if you could speak to that. I don't see Mr. Falsey here. I know he has taken a role in that as well. But
That's me, actually.
Okay, Chris, you want to come forward? You're on the next one too. You want to sit up here?
I'm going to let Pete go first. He will talk all about the shiny building.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Chief.
So, with regards to the question of moving in, we're about halfway there. And the primary reason is we had to do some construction in the building to make it useful for detectives and also to build out the front counter. So that wasn't it's not a big build out, but with all of the things that happen with government contracting, it's taken a little while. And so even though we started this process, I want to say like last September, if I remember right, or somewhere in there, we're just now to the point where construction is really rolling, even though it's not massive. And so we were able to move like command and administration and some other things into the building almost right away. That's done, so we're sort of halfway there. Patrol, detectives, are the two kind of, and the front counter are kind of the three remaining big things. We're, I think, having an update from the contractor this week, but my impression is things are more or less on track, and then we hope right around midsummer, so kind of mid to late June, the rest of those things will happen. And then we'll make a big public announcement, make everybody very well aware of the fact that if you need to have contact with the police department, the front counter location will be downtown. And that's where detectives will be based, and that's where the patrol shifts will be based out of. So we're getting very close, and I would just, even though I'm not known for my patience sometimes, so I get frustrated with the timeline occasionally. You'll hear me talk about that. If you look at it from sort of a perspective of government project, we started in the fall, we're going to be done by midsummer. That's actually pretty fast. So we're actually doing pretty good, even though sometimes I get frustrated.
So to clarify what you said, though, you said patrol is not yet downtown.
Correct.
So fallout is not yet downtown.
Not yet.
It's all still happening out there.
That's correct.
So I think that's going to, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like for public perception, that's going to be a big change. All these patrol cars will be downtown. They'll all be leaving from downtown. And that's what people will sort of in their head think, oh, they finally moved downtown.
I think that and the combination of opening the front counter downtown,
Yeah.
those two things will be the kind of big, it really happened kind of the moment. Now, what I will say is like the CAP team and the DUI unit and the traffic unit and much of the crime suppression division has already moved. So there's quite a bit of patrol car traffic in and out of there now, but it's nothing compared to the volume of having patrol shifts down there.
So one thing I'd like to do is, and I want you to let us know when you're ready, is I'd like to have a special meeting of the Public Safety Committee and do a tour and go and see our new building once it's all up and ready to go. What month do you think would be most appropriate?
Probably, I would say probably July is a good target, and then as we get closer, we can sort of adjust if we need to, if for some reason the move schedule falls behind. And we do have a meeting space. Well, the meetings are public though. We can definitely accommodate a tour. I was going to suggest that you could have the meeting there, that we have a meeting space that would accommodate that, but it's challenging to have it be open to the public due to the security requirements for the building.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary.
Okay.
I would just want to do a tour, basically.
No problem.
Mr. Constant?
I don't know that that's necessarily true. If it is publicly noticed meeting and it is intended for the committee to be there for the tour, then it will be open to the public.
Oh yeah,
For
the tour would be, but he said about holding an actual meeting like this in their building.
I think if it were a one-time deal, it would be the same hassle for everybody. If it were a multi-time effort, then of course it would be not a good idea.
Right.
But functionally speaking, there's no difference between if we're all going in for a tour, 5 people show up from the public, they're coming with us. And so if it's a...
We'd have to figure that out.
Yeah. So-
Yeah, let's talk, let's email back and
Yep.
forth and talk to the clerk or legal as well about how we comply with the Open Meetings Act, but also,
Right.
talk to Todd about how we comply with the Open Meetings Act, but simultaneously don't compromise your security in any way.
Yeah, we'd love to have you guys there.
And so I want to talk a little bit about the building you're leaving behind. So we passed the bond. Can you talk a little bit more about the plan there and what's going to happen with the old HQ and what the timeline is there?
Absolutely. So, great question. I mean, one of the things that really made all of this make sense is the ability to take the facility at Elmore and convert that into primarily storage space for property and evidence. So, the plan is, I think we have about 4,500 square feet dedicated to property and evidence storage there now, and that's kind of the same size it's always been since it was built in the early to mid 80s. We want to expand that to about 30,000 square feet of storage space, which is going to be obviously most of the footprint there. And so that the renovation there is primarily centered around making as much evidence storage space as we possibly can. It's more efficient for the staff to have it all in one location, or as much of it in one location as possible. It gets us out of the off-site storage business, and we just desperately need it, as everybody is well aware. And so that's the primary, going to be the primary purpose of the build-out. Now, the 911 center is still going to be at the Elmore location. To have an effective 911 answering point, you need to have all kinds of sort of backup infrastructure to make sure that no matter what the disaster is, 911 still rings and we answer it. And that facility has all that. We also just recently completed, about a year and a half ago, a complete renovation of the 911 center. So it's a really, really nice workspace. It's very functional, and it actually has the capacity to accommodate the additional staff that we talked about earlier bringing on, that we're already in the process of doing. So that will stay there. Obviously, the property and evidence folks will still be based out of there. Our records section that handles all the police records, they will still be based out of the Elmore facility, although they will have representatives downtown because that's who mans or staffs the front counter. And so as we renovate, we will convert some of the space for them to have essentially office space to work out of. If you've ever walked through that facility and seen where they work now, it's in the center of the building. There are no windows. It's very dark. The ceiling's kind of low. It feels like a cave. And so I think we can all recognize that, having good functional workspace for people improves their productivity. It reduces the amount of sick call-in and other things that we experience with a large staff. So we want to make sure that the space that they are working out of is very functional for them. And what they have now really just isn't. The building has been in continual operational use for about 35 years, 24/7, 365. It's gone through sort of several phases of adjusting over the years. And if you just even think about that relative to a home, right? you build a home, you move into it, maybe you make some adjustments over the years, you divide up rooms, and then you take the divisions down, things just get weird over time. That's where it is now. The earthquake didn't do it any favors, so there was a substantial amount of earthquake damage. We're in the process of working our way through that. It's not structural, it's mostly cosmetic inside the building, but that hasn't been repaired in anticipation of this renovation, so, but that'll happen as well. And then the final thing that was listed in the bond proposition that created, I think, a fair amount of confusion is that we'll take the existing crime lab space that we have at the facility and we'll expand it. We've had our own crime lab there for decades. It's actually in a space that was originally a jail when the building was built, which we have, according to Captain Cook, who just retired after 40 years, we never actually used as a jail. We built it, never used it, and then eventually got converted into other things. So that's the space they're in now. We'll give them more space. We'll renovate the space that they have allocated to be more functional for what they do. And then we'll also, at the same time, set it up for sort of future, if we decide to add additional capacity or capability to our own crime lab, then they'll have that space available to do it. When you're tearing the building apart, now is the time to do it because it'll just be more expensive if it was something we were going to do later. And they need the additional space now anyway. So that's kind of the overall summary of what will happen there.
Thank you, Chief. So the last question I had on this topic, if anyone else has questions too, is about the prospects for purchasing the building. You know, we use an unusual financing mechanism through ACDA, so we basically quickly get control of this building because it was on the market and we got a screaming good deal. But it doesn't make sense to lease a building for a really long time if you could perhaps own it. So what are the prospects for doing that?
I think Mr. Schutte has all the information on that.
Mr. Schutte, if you might.
Sure. Through the Chair, Chris Schutte, Office of Economic and Community Development. Charter amendment you're referring to lifted the $1 million limit on lease purchase acquisitions of capital assets, whether it's a building or other materials that are expensive. And so by doing that, one of the opportunities available to the municipality, whether it's for APD or actually we're looking at a project for ASD, we are able now to enter into lease purchase acquisition, which in essence is a financing mechanism that can help convert a long-term tenant like a government entity tends to be, convert those lease payments into equity payments, if you will, and own a capital asset outright at the conclusion of that lease term. For the 716 West 4th Avenue building, it's a little bit more complicated because, number one, the ACDA, entered into a leaseback financing proposition to purchase the building. Leaseback is where you hand over assets that you own outright, in our case, a parking garage or a parking lot. In exchange, you lease back the facility from the capital markets or from the financer, if you will, for a very low rate. I think we're paying $1 or $10 a year, something very, very low. In exchange, they front you the money, basically the asset value or the lease value of that property over the long term. It's different than traditional financing in that you're not offering up the garage, we're not offering up the parking garage as collateral. It is in the interest of the, I guess COPs is a common one that you guys are familiar with. The issuer of the COPs for those assets, they need to collect that lease revenue. They need the building to function. They have no interest in owning or taking on that building. So the continued operation of the leased facility or leased back facility is of utmost importance to them. So the lease-back financing to acquire the building, as you can imagine, has several provisions in it that relate to the timing of that lease payback, the duration of the lease, etc. So we're still working through that and how we can potentially purchase 716 outright for the municipality to own, not for ACA to own. So we don't have a clear path forward yet. It is unfortunately a little bit more complicated than buying something outright from a private party. But as I mentioned, the lease purchase acquisition tool is very useful for cities. It's one that we're looking at for AFD and for others. Most other jurisdictions typically refer to these as P3 projects, public-private partnership projects, where the government entity can commit that lease income into, say, a design-build project that a private industry will finance, construct, and own, but receive those lease payments and hand over the asset at the conclusion of that lease. So, as a tool, there's more to come.
I have a question for Mr. Weddleton in queue as well. So, ACDA, actually I have two questions. ACDA is sort of municipal, right?
They're quasi-independent municipal entities.
How independent are they, and how much influence could we potentially have on getting them to renegotiate this deal in a way that's more favorable to us? Or is that not really an issue? Do you think that they are perfectly willing to do that with us or for us?
So I'm going to take your question in two parts. How convincing can you be to ACDA? They are independent. So you do approve their board, and you do approve the mayor's appointment for the executive director and the board members. But they are independent on the balance sheets. In fact, because of their operations, they contribute MISA dollars to the municipality annually, so they're a revenue generator for the city. But they have to operate as if they are fully independent. They have separate procurement policies, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first question, or first answer. The second question is, is it a good deal? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole reason that ACDA was used as the entity to participate in this acquisition of 716. In a simplified form, if you think back to the PowerPoint presentations we did during the initial purchase work sessions, we broke down the lease payments and what on a dollar by dollar or cent by cent basis, what all of that money goes towards. And the takeaway from that is the bulk of it goes to paying the debt, if you will, the lease back. So ACDA does collect a little bit of money for long-term capital reserves for the building, because they are responsible for major repairs to the building, things like changing, walls inside, et cetera. APD's got that, or facilities has that, fixing broken pipe, things like that. If another earthquake hits and a significant portion of the building fails, that actually is ACDA's responsibility. So they collect about $180,000 annually for a capital reserve account. But everything else in that lease goes directly into either financing costs, the downtown improvement district, things like that. So it's a very good deal.
One brief on that very subject.
Yeah.
We also approved their budget. Of all the things that we do.
Budget, board, and director.
Yeah.
So, and keep in mind, it's interesting, it's a little bit of a swap-a-roo, if you will, but because ACDA is now realizing greater revenues through this lease with APD than they were in the past, their MISA also goes up.
Mr. Weldon, you have a question?
I think in addition on this, when we voted on that, should we just get a bond some way and buy? That was typically how we do things. Well, and then in the end, we own it. This was the case Amy had made. But the way I see it is, it's almost. They are independent, but they are there to achieve municipal goals just through this entity. So it's like really another department getting this money to do things that we want for the city. So if you say they have more money and they're putting it, it's not just the MISA, but they're putting it into the downtown, improving the downtown. Well, if they were doing it, we'd have to do it. So it's just in a way of funneling. We get the building, we funnel money to an entity that does our work. So I'm just not worried about that for this particular building. But this building, and then the public works building, things like that, where we could renegotiate some way. That's much more important to me.
Yeah, through the chair. That's a great segue into the ways that the new lease purchase acquisition powers can be used. Both this building and the Purchase Center have tricky but lucrative leases for the owners, and so negotiating a lease purchase of those, of course, will be a fairly long and complicated process. But that's the whole point in having this tool, is that it's very easy to commit to a 20-year or 30-year lease as a government entity, because typically speaking, legislature excluded, annual appropriations for lease space typically never fail. So turning that into equity is a great tool for cities to actually acquire and own, which ultimately should be the goal, is our goal for us to outright own our properties and stop leasing properties.
So to follow up on that, why, and I don't want to give up too much in a public forum, but why would they ever agree to do that? I mean, they've got us sort of, we're in their building. It's extremely difficult for us to move and expensive for us to move. It's been very lucrative for them for a very long time. And it's not just this building, there are several buildings like this. Why would they be willing to convert to a
Are you talking about
lease
City Hall?
loan? City Hall and with the Permanent Center, and there's some other places too.
Thank you. Good question. So both facilities are nearing the end of their lease terms. I believe we have 7 years left on this building and maybe about 9 on the Permanent Center, which sounds like a very long time, but in the lifespan of a 30-year lease, that's actually when you start thinking about if you want to continue that lease or not.
Sure.
I do know that 2 out of the 3 owners of this facility are very interested in disposing of it for whatever reasons, but that negotiation on purchase price, on lease rates to pay that purchase price, et cetera, that will take longer.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
But to answer your question more squarely, it's because we are their very juicy roast of a patron, of a tenant, and we have given them 3 times or 2 times plus what this building is worth.
Yeah.
And the fact is, the market, if you look around, has lots of vacancy, and they're not going to get a juicy, fat turkey client again. And so their calculus will be, can we fill this building and continue to make a profit, or should we sell it? And so that's what will motivate them to sell. Market forces, if we had a major turn in the economy between now and 7 years from now, and all of a sudden we had 99% occupancy in the downtown, their tune might change, but frankly, we're not there, and we aren't likely to be there. So there are a lot of reasons why they would be motivated to sell, because if we move, they're left with a big hole, and that hole costs them money every single month.
But through the chair, I think a more favorable way to look at that is that we're a very reliable tenant.
Yes.
And yes, because of the duration of this lease term, we're paying significantly more than if we were nimble enough to move as market forces dictate, us wanting to look at other places. But that being said, it on a per square foot basis, it's not tremendously more expensive than a lot of the other options that are on the market. But it is a very long-term lease, and it does have several other capital reserve requirements, et cetera, which are smart to have, but does add up over the term of the lease.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schutte. So I think that will do it for that topic. We have 5 minutes left. Can you do Vision Zero in 5 minutes, or should we push it? Okay.
We'll do it.
So I think
bring
that's
up
all for you,
Charles
Chief, if you guys
Boyle,
wanted to
Public
go.
Works. Okay, that's okay.
Thank you. Police officers in the fire, busy folks, so if y'all want to leave, feel free.
Great, well, thank you. As I mentioned, Chris Schutte, Director of Office and Economic Community Development. I brought with me a man smarter than me on every subject, including Vision Zero, Charles Boyle from Public Works. And we're going to do a 25-minute presentation in 5 minutes. Can somebody get the lights? I'm just going to kick it off, and Charles is going to walk you through sort of where we're at. But this project started about the fall of 2015. This was an initiative that we embraced along with other sort of non-motorized transportation advocates like Bike Anchorage and others. In a nutshell, this is an international movement to recognize that you need to get to 0 deaths, fatalities, or incidents when it comes to motorized and non-motorized users. And so we applied for and successfully received what are known as Alaska Transportation Alternatives Program dollars to help fund a lot of this work. It included about 2.5 years worth of work that we're going to sum up in 3 minutes. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so a couple things that differentiate this from other traffic safety initiatives is Vision Zero is meant to be very data-driven, so we didn't want to just do what we think might work. We wanted to look at what the numbers are telling us and then apply our resources where we thought it would make the most difference. This has been something that's been done in over 30 American cities, as Chris mentioned. New York City saw a reduction in traffic fatalities of 22% in 3 years with Vision Zero techniques. And the other thing that distinguishes Vision Zero is we wanted this to be a cross-departmental effort. So this isn't just something that lives in the traffic department or at APD, this is something that we're all working on together and applying all our resources. So just really briefly, part of this being data-driven is we didn't just want to look at, there's a tendency with pedestrian deaths and cyclist deaths and traffic deaths to assign blame, and we wanted to get away from that and look at what is human behavior, where are these crashes occurring, and what can we do to address that, rather than looking at, was a person in a crosswalk or not, but did someone have their blinker on, was the driver under the influence of alcohol. Our goal is to reduce deaths without those judgments. So as Chris mentioned, we launched in 2016. A great amount of what we've done since then is data collection, so I'll run through that quickly. One thing that we've seen is there's a larger number of traffic collisions and deaths. However, that's because there's more drivers on the road. What we find is if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist that's involved in a crash, you're much more likely to either die or suffer a serious injury.
I'm going to interject real quick. That data collection effort has been very long and very complicated and arduous because there are disparate sources of information that are incomplete and some gaps and some overlaps. But APD, AFD, even DOT to a degree, have all been extremely helpful in trying to compile, put all this together into a useful format to help inform the decisions that we're making from Vision Zero's perspective.
Right. And one of the punchlines from the data that we found is that, in general, speed kills. So you won't be surprised to see our high entry network for pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles is all along our major arterials throughout town. A lot of those are state roads. Some of them are muni roads, but that's another reason that coordination is important in this effort. Just a quick stat, in a collision involving a vehicle traveling 30 miles an hour, 60% of pedestrians survive. If that car is traveling 40 miles per hour, 80% of the pedestrians hit will be killed. So it's a big difference in terms of speed. Alcohol is also a large factor in drug use in the crashes that we see, but it is also only about involved in one third of the fatalities. So it would be too simple to just say, well, we need to address substance abuse and alcohol abuse to address these issues. Let's see. So I think we ran through that pretty quickly, but we wanted to talk a little bit about implementation.
So, a good transition between that last slide and this implementation slide is there is a Vision Zero plan we can share with you all, so you can see what these numbers have pointed to or where they're pointing us towards. Also, one of the things that I think has really shocked me about this process and is a relevant topic to many of you on the Assembly is who exactly are we talking about? Who are the people that are being injured or killed in these incidents? And it's probably not going to be very surprising, but it's our less affluent, older, non-white populations. So it's a scary demographic.
Not the demographic itself.
No, sorry, it's a scary statistic. Thank you.
But that's across the board, regardless of whether it's a bicycle accident or a car accident. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, obviously within each there's nuances, but broadly speaking, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I want to be clear, when we're not talking about pedestrians hitting pedestrians. These are almost all cars hitting pedestrians or cars hitting bikes. So they're all vehicle related. Just some of them are vehicle to vehicle.
Right. So what we're looking at doing in the next year is how can we institutionalize Vision Zero within the municipality. So that goes to establishing a core team that meets regularly and is looking at this data throughout the year. And then we're also looking to roll out a public messaging campaign, because a big part of the creating a culture of safety in Anchorage is modifying public behavior as well. So we're seeing a lot of red light running, speeding, driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and those are all things that we can address somewhat with road design and planning, but that's where we need to bring in enforcement and other things as well. So
and this, by the way, that education goes both ways, because for every driver who isn't aware of their surroundings or the rules of the road or rules of crosswalks, there are a number of bicyclists and pedestrians also who are not. So this is not to single out vehicle drivers. This is across the board. We need to educate and change behaviors.
And then for just specific actions we're looking at in the next year. Part of it, as I said, is creating an agency task force, regular updates, launching the public safety campaign. We're looking at different events we can do to raise awareness of this. And then just working in every phase to build Vision Zero into our planning and review processes as well. So.
And one of the items on there, as you can see, is identify, even though it's spelled incorrectly, is to identify additional funding sources to help keep this work moving ahead. In addition to the ATAP grant, the city has received a number of other grants, such as a FHWA grant that sent Stephanie Mormilla, traffic engineer, and I to Vision Zero School, if you will, in Seattle last year. We regularly send many of our planners and other traffic engineers to NACTO events. So anytime we can expand that knowledge base and begin to incorporate all the disciplines, PM&E is next on the hit list. We're going to help educate and elevate people's awareness of this.
Yeah, so that was kind of our presentation in the most abbreviated form, but as Chris mentioned, the report is at muni.org/Vision Zero, and we can answer questions that you have.
Mr. Constant?
You'll go back a slide.
Yeah.
So I heard you talk a lot about how the planning and design process is being influenced, but I don't see it reflected here. Is that just in the updates, or maybe we set up a line somewhere in there that talks specifically about how the planning department, the PM&E department are all working towards this, right? Because a lot of this is the community-oriented stuff, but when we see design projects coming forward, that
I think that's a great point, and I thought it was in here. Maybe I misread it, but the Vision Zero philosophy, if you will, or approach, actually has permeated through. Right now, it's in the TIP and the MTP review process. It's very prevalent at these discussions.
you're right, but where the rubber meets the road is where the plans are built and they're designed and they're moving to implementation.
And as an AMATS or former AMATS member, you know this pretty well. There's a lot of work being done on that relates to this on things such as complete streets. How do we actually design, more awesome Spenard Road examples that can account for all the different modes of transportation and safely?
Just maybe reflect that in here somewhere, because I didn't see, but that's just
Right, and I think updating the non-motorized plan is also a big part of that. That will help us inform us about which projects should make it onto the CIP and the TIP over the long term as well.
So one thing I'm curious about this. So education, I think, is a big part of this, but what Chris was getting at, and I think what a lot of us agree with, is that the built environment is sort of crucially important. Right? And in addition to the built environment, you have sort of the regulations layered on top of that. And in this case, it seems like, since speed kills, well, speed limits are, one of our tools. I have to say, my experience working in the traffic department, they are very resistant from they appear to be, perhaps I'm mistaken, very resistant to lowering speed limits when the community is asking for it. The community comes to me and says, we want to lower the speed limit. I go to them and they say, no.
Well,
so why is that? And their argument is, well, we can lower the speed limit, but it won't lower behavior.
Right. Well, and also I think to add another layer of complexity to it, when we're talking about the level of speed that kills people, we're talking about the big arterials in town too. So it's not that simple to just say, all right, everyone drive 35 miles an hour on Benson now, that sort of thing, or this new Seward. So there's some reason to believe, one of the things we're looking at is how can we move pedestrians and cyclists away from those corridors through the 32nd, 33rd bike corridor, for instance, to deconflict drivers and pedestrians. But I think that's a longer conversation. One thing we've talked about is pilot projects to look at red light running with APD, because that's something that is a factor as well, but also speeding. So these aren't issues that can be addressed quickly, that's for sure.
And also, just to respond to you, I assure you, it's not you that they're just saying no to. It's generally across the board, but it's not because of a general resistance to lower speed limits. Much like the Vision Zero work, the work that the traffic department does is data-driven. And I think what Charles said, but I'll say it a little bit differently, is we need to figure out better ways to just get pedestrian vehicular conflict points out of the way. And speed limits are certainly a part of reducing the damage done when that occurs, but if you can attack the root of the problem and avoid those conflicts to begin with, you're going a lot further. So when we talk about things like separated walkways, separated bike paths, et cetera, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's something like photo stoplight or photo red light running, you begin to really affect people's behavior and separate those collision points, if you will.
Mr. Welton and Mr. Constant.
I think there's some good, I mean, I like this, I don't know what else you can do. Of course, you should accept this, but, the vision. But there's some things that we do to get to Vision Zero that I think are very unhealthy for us. And one is the school districts focus on putting everyone either on a bus or in a private car to get the kids to school. And so they don't promote crossings, I'm thinking of Service High, but there's other examples, So we train everyone to be in a vehicle at all times because it's the only safe way to get around. That's what we're telling people. But if you do take them out of those, it probably is less safe, at certain moments. But we don't train our children to think you have to be in a car to drive across the street.
Yeah, and I can't speak entirely for ASD, but you've raised that point in the past, and I actually looked into it. I looked into it, and it turns out that ASD doesn't have a policy about mandating that kids have to arrive in a vehicle. But you're right; they absolutely think it's a better way to go, and they don't, in my opinion, and yours too, put enough effort into improving the pedestrian-built environment around our schools.
So I don't know the history of just the follow-up. So my understanding was they did a fairly large project right in front of Service High School, the road there. Is that right? And they sped it up.
Realistically, I don't think they raised the speed limit, but when it was more hilly, they call it a vertical curve, and they smooth those out. So basically, you feel like you can go faster, you can.
Would that project have gone forward in the same way with the Vision Zero framework in place?
Well, without knowing as much about that project in particular, I think reducing the hills also increases the site visibilities too.
Yeah.
That road's a little different than say a street right in front of an elementary school. So it would be tough to say what recommendations we might have made through that process.
And that street is right in front of an elementary school.
Right. Yeah.
Trail side, but,
Right, and that was a DOT project.
Right.
Well, and that was my other question is even if we embrace this, to what degree, I guess through AMATs, can we influence DOT to actually embrace these? Because at least places like Muldoon, they seem pretty resistant.
I'll add that DOT actually has their version of Vision Zero, and they call it Near Zero.
Towards
Zero.
Yeah, it's actually
approaching
towards zero.
Towards zero. Yeah.
Our vision is sort of good.
But it's the same general philosophy as Vision Zero, and they actually have been very receptive and active participants in the Vision Zero work.
Good. Mr. Constant, you had a question?
Well, it's just back to what Mr. Whittleton was saying. We're all kind of moving around. The facts are, it doesn't matter what the posted sign speed limit is. What matters is how wide is that road, how many lanes are there, and how comfortable do people feel driving at what speed.
Right.
And that's functionally what sets our speed limits, is how we build it. And so it's super critical to embed these concepts into every project that are coming across the table. Because even if you call it a street, if it's a road, it's going to function as a road. And so that's our responsibility to figure out who we are and where we want to be in when we grow up. Right? Are we just going to be high traffic moving community where the goal is to get cars from A to B as fast as possible, functionally, realistically, or do we have another set of values?
I say yes, but, and I absolutely want to improve the built environment, but I will say, the counterexample I use is J-Bear. If you drive around J-Bear, and I do it a lot, there is one road in particular I think of that's just a straight line with a runway. And if it was out here, everybody would be driving 60 down it. But it's posted 40, and everybody drives 40 all the time. And the reason is because the MPs are everywhere. So you can get to a point with enforcement where people follow the rules. Even these, gung-ho 23-year-olds in their lifted trucks, they're driving 25.
So then the suggestion there is an increase of about maybe $25 million in police officers for traffic enforcement. Which, if we were to just invest in making our roads work the way that we want them to, we would actually solve the problem.
But I guess my point is that in certain hot spots, I think in places where we can't realistically change the built environment in the short term, like Muldoon, for example, although we actually did in the northern part of Muldoon recently. But I think a combination of enforcement and change and perhaps education, I think, can get some results.
Agreed.
So we are out of time. We have time for audience participation. I'm going to extend the meeting. Would anyone like to participate in this meeting? Yes, go ahead.
My name is Eugene Carlhaven. I live in Matthew Valley. Follow public process. Public process on appropriate decision made by the governing body is more like public interest. Note for the record. By the way, I didn't arrive until 11:22. Okay, for the record. Semi agenda is not. Excuse me. The meeting for this, the agenda of this meeting is not on the website for the public. You don't know what's going on. I guess some of the assembly members know about the agenda. I've seen it before, but we, as public, don't have any knowledge. There were substantial presentations by particularly the police department here, visual, and there was no copies available, and how would the public be able to see? And then the last thing, in closing, is I strongly encourage you to stop having these meetings in here. Go over to LUSAC Library and be fair to the public so they can be engaged and connected. And that's all I have to say. And thank you for listening. 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.